Hello and welcome to BQ Prime. I'm Hiral Dadia. And as we know now that the Tata Group has announced the merger of Vistara with Air India, and this is something which has been long due. Singapore Airlines, which will own minority stake, which owns minority stake in Vistara and its JV with the Tata, will now own 25% of the enlarged Air India, into which it will infuse 2,000 crores with Tata Sons as the majority owner. What will this mean for both the airlines? To discuss this, joining us, we have Mr. Jitendra Bhargava, former ED at Air India and author of The Descent of Air India, Mark Martin, CEO at Martin Consulting, and Parampreet Singh Bakshi, Vice President at Kappa India, joining in. Welcome to the show, gentlemen, and a pleasure to speak to you at a moment where a lot of views that are needed to understand what would this actually mean for an airline which was actually initially owned by a private entity, moved to the government, and now back to the private entity. Mark, coming to you now, on a similar lines, what would this rearrangement actually mean according to you for Air India and Vistara? And do you think this is something which was a clear, desperate move and was desperately needed as well?
Hiral, a pleasure to be with you this morning. We need to look at the background of how these two airlines came into India. AirAsia and Vistara, they came under when the government changed its FDI policy, allowing 49% into India. From the start, it has been a tumultuous past, and it has been a rocky road for both these airlines, with actually creating a dent in the Indian market. AirAsia in particular, and we've seen what's happened in the past. AirAsia was merged, and now Vistara gets merged. And interestingly, the Singapore Airlines, in its press statement, the Singapore Stock Exchange has made it very clear and stated on record that Vistara has been in losses, and Vistara's merger will transform and change. So in short, AirAsia and Vistara, both the joint venture companies of Tata's, has been an utter sheer disaster with India. I mean, Vistara in particular, it's always had an identity crisis. They've been trying to figure where do they get into the low cost market or the full service market. Are they really a full service carrier? So there've been tremendous amount of fitment issues that they've had with the Indian consumer. And what they are today, and what these two airlines today, is basically Chalta Gaddi and Ram Bharose, because when you just keep running it and focusing on year-on-year air transport and air traffic growth, you are going to make some money, and the money is going to come in the bag. The bigger worry I have is, where does this go from here? Now, it looks eerily spooky, this deal. It's almost as identically similar to Etihad Jet Airways. 25%, $250 million in Jet Etihad, similarly in this deal. What actually happens to an Air India? Is an Air India's aspirations going to be thwarted? Is Air India going to reroute and direct all its flights to Singapore? Are we going to end up making Singapore Airlines control in Air India, which I don't think is effective, because the whole idea of disinvesting Air India, as the PM said very clearly, was the whole idea of India being driven on a stable, formidable airline, which is robust, which takes India to the world, and Air India regained this old glory, like Mr. Bhargava said, an international airline which was iconic, which was pretty much a network that nobody could even compare itself to. That was an Air India that we all knew. And now when Singapore Airlines takes over, the bigger fear I have is, do these two mergers, AirAsia going back, and so is a Vistara coming in, and the 25% acquisition, does this actually tell us that the Tatas have no clue or running of an airline business and trying to figure themselves out? Because this actually reinforces a tremendous amount of doubt on the Tata's own ability to run an effective airline. So I'm going to say one thing here is that now, this merger is not something which is glamorous or to be celebrated. It looks as if it's a very clear, desperate move to merge these airlines in, wipe out the losses, hide the past, bury the evidence, and burn everything back, start fresh. Now that, and also have this, and what's really strange is the surreptitious approach to this. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that Campbell came a year ago from the SIA cadre, and this merger happens. If SIA wanted to be absolutely frank and upfront with India, they should have acquired with Tata the stake from Government of India at the time of the bid. Why didn't SIA step in at that stage and acquire it? So look, there are questions which have to be answered. In a broader perspective, I hope and I sincerely hope Mr. Bhargava is correct that this will strengthen Air India and make it a world-class airline and bring back the glory of what Air India had, which was an airline to reckon with. But on the flip side, from all that we're seeing here, is something which is, which the opposite is true, and it's on the contrary.
Absolutely. I mean, there are two sides of a coin right now in this conversation. Right, and I think that's going to be a good point to consider as well. From a managerial, operational perspective, Mark, do you see any changes happening? Because clearly there will be consolidation at various fronts, right? Even from an HR perspective. Anything on that front that you would want to add?
Hiral, I'm gonna comment on what both Bhargava as well as Bakshi has said. I think first of all, we need to be very clear that this great Singapore management way of working and this new technology and skill and management style. I mean, let's face it, Vistara is owned 49% by Singapore, and they've been in losses for 5 years. So Singapore Airlines' management, technology, advancement, new marketing styles has been an utter sheer disaster. And now, Mr. Bhargava is contradicting himself again and again. He talks about Air India being Air India and the management of Air India and so on. I mean, let's be honest. Tatas know how to run global entities. They run Chorus Steel, they run Tata Motors and Jaguar Land Rover. They run companies which are 10 times or tenfold revenue of an Air India. So the Tatas don't need to be taught how to run a business, or they don't need any management styles from Singaporeans or let alone anybody. Air India as an airline has thrived, has done well, has functioned, has operated for ever since the government took over. And yes, there is a JRD Tata legacy where he created it at a certain level and he obviously had to step down. But it doesn't mean that Air India was in any way badly run and we saw crashes or incidents every month or every week where people died. That did not happen. Air India is an airline, and an airline's job is to carry people and transport people. Now, what really comes up here is, are you trying to tell me that the level of Indian aviation is so insecure that a Tata has to bring in a Singapore Airlines and merge a Vistara and AirAsia all to go after one Indigo? Are we really reinforcing the fact that Indigo is a dominant superpower and a monster in the basement that India's created, and everybody wants to go after it? I disagree with that notion, and I completely disagree with that logic. And now on what Mr. Bhargava has been talking about, tickets and cost of fare or whatever, it is very clear. The more airlines we have in India, the more competition, the more competitiveness, the more the consumer has a right and ability to choose. Now, if you're going to start merging everybody and you start looking at this corporatization act, or air corporatization or corporatization of airlines, and you start looking at 3 4 players, that's going to be more damaging for India's market. That's going to be damaging for the consumer, because you're taking back consumer choices, and market dynamics that govern the price of tickets are going to go. So that means the cost of tickets are going to be will go back to cartelization of prices. The cost of tickets are going to dramatically go up. Consumers are going to suffer. Indians will suffer. Now, I think the whole background of where the disinvestment of Air India happened was so that Air India gets back its old glory and Air India becomes a global carrier and a global operator like the way it did and like the way it should, and bring back its old legacy. But does that really have to be driven by Singapore Airlines? Are you telling me that in India, we as Indians, or forget Indians, as Tatas, we don't know how to run an organization or a management? I think that means but all this discussion, that means the government has made the biggest mistake of disinvesting Air India. And if that be so, if that is the discourse, then I certainly foresee a day when the government will buy back Air India and take it back in its fold because of its sheer national asset value. I certainly don't think that is ever going to happen based on what the discourse of Bhargava as well as Bakshi has transpired so far. My view is I would still like to look at this positively. My bigger connotation is, to what extent is this going to replicate and translate to reinforcing Air India and truly making it a world airline, as opposed to thwarting it to a Singapore Airlines objective agenda and a bigger game plan? It's the game plan I have a concern with. And the more important part is, Air India is and would be one of the largest airlines in India, and it historically has been so pre-Indigo. And when Indigo came in, they've reinforced their local market. Yes, Indigo has had a challenge with going international, because with 300 aircraft, A320s, you've locked yourself into a network which can't go beyond 4.5 to 5 hours with full load. So an international airline requires a whole lot of guts and a whole lot of capital infusion. Now, as far as capital infusion into Air India is concerned, I mean, we're talking about the Tata Sons here. I don't think they need Singaporean money to turn around Air India, because Tata's has got enough money to buy maybe 10 or 20 Singapore Airlines in the bargain. The bigger question is, there is something that Chandrasekhar has thought about, and obviously we all know that Mr. R&T is directing everything in the Tata group. He's sitting in the back, sitting on the fence and sitting in the back seat. So there is a bigger game plan. I would like to trust the judgment of the Tata leadership, at least with this acquisition, and I hope it does not demean or destroy Air India's aspirations. Because what if this is true, the opposite is true, then what the government did to Air India for the last 50 years that Mr. Bhargava talks about so passionately, what Singapore Airlines will end up doing with foreign control would be worse than what the government has done.
Right.
Yeah.
In
So,
fact, taking your
let
point,
me,
Mark,
can
over
I
here, but
come
can
in?
I?
No, Mark has made a whole lot of points and arguing, look, this is what is it. First is, it is not the way a business is conducted with the airlines. India's ecosystem makes an airline lose money. So it is no reflection on Vistara's management or any management for that example. As I said earlier, even Indigo is losing money in our environment. No, hold it, Mark. Coming about Tata's.
No, ecosystem defines what? The consumer's ability to, the consumer's propensity to choose.
The fact is, when airlines.
I don't understand what you mean by
no,
ecosystem.
I'll explain. Give me the time to explain.
No, ecosystem implies that you have an air transport network that makes sense and the consumer has a right to choose.
Mark,
if you're not selling enough tickets, then obviously the consumer doesn't want you. Why does Indigo have a number one
let me
position?
bring
No, Mark, look.
Param as well on
even
this,
when
Param?
even when airlines do
Indigo,
85, 88, 90% load factor,
what triggered
losing
Indigo's
money.
growth?
Hold
Right?
it, Mark.
Let's be clear. What triggered Indigo's growth? Indigo's growth today, and being the largest
Mark, why don't you do an analysis?
I have.
And see, hold it. Let me explain. If you are flying 85, 90% load factors and you still lose money, there is something wrong in the system. High operational cost, price sensitivity, and I'm not getting the airline promoters, airline management told it. Why are you not allowing me to speak out?
300 aircraft.
Simple reason, as I said earlier.
So that logic only goes after
seats.
So the logic of ecosystem works for Vistara, but doesn't work for Indigo. I mean, that's
it
strange.
works.
But I think this merger overall, Mr. Bhargav and Mark.
Go into a loop,
Yeah, but
this is where I'm saying. If Vistara have to price their tickets 100, 150 rupees higher than Indigo, in spite of the fact that you have lesser number of seats on an aircraft, you have higher cost of operation, you're going to lose money. It's the full service carrier versus the low cost carrier. Quality of management is not a point to be considered here. Then talking about that, hold it. You're talking about it. What did I say earlier?
Vistara has business class seats, and they have seats at the back, which is economy, that competes with LCC. So you've added 4 product classes in Vistara. You've got a business, you got economy first, and you have an economy. So it's not an Air India. Let's be very, very clear. And second of all, Vistara's economy price offering is sometimes more aggressive than an Indigo. So,
gentlemen, I think
Mark, we are
digressing from the point of conversation right now. Yeah, we are digressing. In fact, I would want Param to come in. Param, from your point of view, overall, we already spoke about what it would mean in terms of market share. Absolutely, a welcome step for the industry is what my key takeaway is going to be from here on. And clearly, if you go to see the merger along with the operational efficiency as well as the managerial efficiency that we could be potentially looking at, would be a win-win for an Air India as well. So I think it's going to be a wait and watch in terms of what we see, because clearly Air India has also embarked on the journey in terms of network optimization, because as a full service carrier, that's something which you really need to concentrate on from metro to metros as well. And in terms of the international side of it as well, if you see, they have actually reinstated a lot of routes that are coming in specifically to Europe as well as North America. So international expansion is also pretty much on the spree right now. So hopefully this is in the right direction. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Bhargav. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Param, for joining us on the show to have a great discussion today. And probably we will get much more opportunities to have a detailed discussion on the same subject in future. Thank you for watching us at BQ Prime.